What's going on, guys? Welcome back. Today I thought I'd take a little break from the PvP that I normally upload because I got a couple of comments, some newer than others, asking either for help with a deck setup or a gear setup. So I thought I'd take some time real quick to just show you guys all the gear set and deck setups that I personally use right now on each of my characters. The only two schools I do not have leveled up right now are Balance and Storm, so I won't be able to show you guys anything with them in game, but I will still try to give you guys some sort of at least recommendations for the gear setups, just as like a starting point, and you guys can go from there. Couple disclaimers. One, this is mostly just to give you guys, like I just said, a starting point. I do not expect my deck setups to work for every single person. They are fairly well tuned to how I play the game and how I cycle my deck. So if you copy it directly, you might not see the same success that I do with it. So you may have to do some tweaking around. And as far as the gear setups, I do not know if all of them are necessarily the best gear setups, but they're the ones that I'm currently using and having some success with. So without further ado, let's just get right into it. Alright, so I'm going to start things off with the ice here for a couple of reasons. The first one being that I'm just fairly confident in the setup that I have here. It hits a lot of the stat caps that are currently in place for ice, so I'm very happy with what I've been able to come up with here. And the other reason is I got a comment probably close to 2 months ago at this point. The timestamp on it just says 1 month, but you know, when you get into times like that, it doesn't really address like individual days. But that comment was asking for an ice setup, and I kind of feel bad that it's taken me this long to respond to it. So we're gonna just start things off here with the ice. So as far as the stat caps go for ice, you guys can see here, you're capped at 98 damage and 31 pierce. This is the lowest offensive stats that are out of any of the schools, but you make up for it with 77.1k health and, you know, low to mid 70s on the resist, so not too bad there. And honestly, if you are able to hit most of these caps, your stats are actually kind of demonic on an ice. So the stats that I have right now, we are just shy of the health cap. There's really not much more I could do in the way of getting it all the way up there, but this is close enough. We got the damage cap, 70 universal res, which is kind of ridiculous. We can't fizzle any of our lore spells or our gambits, so if we want to go for a Winter Moon combo, we're chilling. If we want to go for an Oni, we're chilling. Crit's a little bit low compared to most other schools, but again, you're an ice, so you're not really expected to have a ton of crit, and we got some pretty decent block to complement it, so not the worst overall. We got our pierce cap, and we can't pit fail, so overall the stats are very nice. As far as the gear, we've got the chrysalis hat, we've got the rattlebones robe, the rockstar kicks from the Battle of the Bands one shot, chrysalis wand, the Darkmoor theme. I personally like to use this amulet here. This is from the Novus Explorers pack. You can also run the Nightmare amulet if you want. You can have 71 res instead, but I just like the extra health being closer to that cap, but either one works. And then we're using the Skyfarer ring mostly because if I were to use the Morganth ring, for example, I would actually just be a little bit low on pip chance, and if I can avoid losing to a pip fail, I'm going to do it. We got double breaker mighty on a blimp buddy pet. We got a pierce mount, and I've said this a bunch of times, but I'll go ahead and say it again. I just really like the Baba Yaga decks personally over the Darkmoor decks. I like getting that extra block, even though I do give up some max copies of certain spells and a little bit of CC space. but it's not the end of the world. Now, as for the deck setup, a couple deck building guides for anyone that's trying to get into PvP and doesn't quite know what they want to do. Generally, spells that you want to pull early in the match, or you know you're going to need multiple copies of them throughout the match, you're going to want to pack more copies of. Like Stunblock, for example, you only generally need one of these for the entire match, but you want to be able to pull it in your first couple of turns so you can get it up and not have to worry about it. So I like to run 5 stun blocks. It just helps, you know, ensure that I'm able to pull it relatively quickly and just get them up so I don't have to worry about a stun combo. And spells that you don't necessarily need that many of, or, you know, might just be a good move every once in a while, you're generally going to pack less of. So, like Frost Beetle, I carry 6 of these because when you tri-shield, and they break that tri-shield with pressure and tempo, you can you send one of these and have another shield ready to go, and it's basically the equivalent of a set shield. So, you know, certain things like that. Also, just have all 4 of your bubbles that your deck allows you to have. You want to be able to bubble fight as well. If your opponent starts bubble war, that generally helps ensure that you get bubble control at the end of it, unless they just happen to have more hidden bubbles than you. Spells you're gonna need more than not. Like Snowman is very, very important to have, especially in the death matchup, because they're just 3-fold spam and vamp spam, some of them at least. So you definitely want to have, you know, a bunch of snowmen because they will try to vampire a lot. And I like to have a bunch of trap counters as well, because trap stack is kind of prevalent at the moment, especially against other ices. They just love to trap stack and go for an Everwinter Oni that does 10k damage for absolutely zero reason. But other than that, you know, you want to have your counters to other stuff as well. So, you know, you got your Wyvern for your blade counters, 3-folds sets up your Jin, and also kind of counters heals a little bit. Not necessarily that much with the outgoing calves that are currently in place, but it does help make a little bit of a difference. And you'll probably notice a lack of shield counters in my deck. Personally, I don't run Jin's Defense or anything like that, even though I could. And the main reason for that is I have 7.1k health and 70 resist. There's a shield gambit would need to have like 2 or 3 buffs on it before I'm actually worried about it one-shotting me, for the most part, unless there's been some damage done prior to that. But if the entire strategy is just shielding over and over to go for an Oni or a Myth Jin, I'm not actually that worried about it. As an ice with the resist that I have, it's just not gonna do as much as it normally would to most other schools. And then as far as the side deck goes, you got some side deck hits. You definitely want to have your frostbites. This spell is just really, really good for damage, for breaking shields. It's just good for all that. I got some alley traps here in case I do have some other traps already set up. I can just get the Oni set up real quick and have some pressure with that. Empower, also probably a spell I would consider necessary on most schools, especially against a balance. If they're gonna mana burn spam, you want to be able to keep, you know, get your pips back and still have some sort of offensive pressure against it. And obviously you're gonna want some shields as well. And tri-shields on an ice are just, in my opinion, better than towers, because you're able to leverage them with things like Colossus and Frost Beetle. But yeah, that is the setup on the ice. This setup right now has gotten me to 6-2 this season. I've only gotten 8 matches so far. And one of these losses I don't necessarily think I should have lost. My computer just completely crashed like 3 turns into the match, and when I came back I was at 3k health staring at a Medusa. So I don't necessarily think, if I had the opportunity to actually play the match out, I don't necessarily think I would have lost. So I'm only counting one of these losses, but the record is technically 6-2. But You know, it's doing me well. It's doing me. It's not letting me down all really. So that's it for the ice though. Let's move on. Alright, so next up we have life, and I'm doing life next because one of those comments was specifically for a life deck setup. So we're just gonna get life out of the way right now. I'm actually re-recording this part of the video because I gave out some just very false information about the update that just happened. It actually happened while I was rendering the video last night, but you know, for some reason I was convinced that they were also going to nerf the outgoing caps along with the burst heal ban. But they did not. They just banned certain burst heal cards from advanced combat, but in the process of doing so, they also completely nuked your pip chance. If you're unaware, basically in any form of advanced combat currently, and this is a bug, they will be fixing this, but currently your base pip chance, your 40% base pip chance that you get just naturally by leveling up, it currently says 0 when you go and look at your scaled stats for advanced combat. So like in raids, PvP, challenge mode, and I believe boss rematches are part of that as well. Your pip chance, your base pip chance is 0, and it's just not good. It's really just not good. But before we get into the stats, we'll look at the stat caps for life. So you get 100 damage, 32 pierce, not very offensive. It's slightly better than ice, but still not that offensive. 7.4k health basically, 81 outgoing, and mid 60s for the resist. So as far as the stats that I'm currently running, I'm going to show you guys two different setups here, but the one that I'm running right now, 6.7k health, a little bit low, but you'll see why in a little bit here when we look at the gear. Damage cap of 100, 58 res across the board, pretty solid. Perfect accuracy to life, and I have some death accuracy socketed as well, because I was trying some things with Skeletal Pirate and Banshee being in the deck. If you don't want to do that, you can obviously just swap this out for like a Sanctuary Jewel or something like that. Solid crit, pretty solid block, slightly over pierce cap, 64 outgoing, and perfect pip chance. So the gear that I'm running right now, we've got the Malastare hat, Malastare robe, Chrysalis boots, Chrysalis wand, the level 99 Morgantha Thame, and the other setup that I will be showing you guys does not use the Thame, so if you don't have it, don't worry, you're not able to get it anymore, but I did figure out another setup that you can run without this. Great Inventor's Amulet from the Novus Explorers pack, Stone of the Other Side for just a ton of outgoing. You don't really need damage on your ring. Lifebringer, Double Resist, Armor Breaker, Mighty, and Medic on a Tree Serpent. You could also use Fern Lumi or a Leaf Foot if you wanted for your pet base. But I personally like the Tree Serpent here because you still get one of the fuel cards that the Lumi would give you, and you also get a choke. And if your opponent doesn't know that this pet gives a choke, you can actually pull off some pretty nice stun combos with it. We've got the Mammoth Mini for the mount. You don't actually need this, you could just run 62 outgoing and be perfectly fine. But you don't need any other stat mount, which is really nice. You don't need Rock Mount for the pips, you don't need Life Culture, you don't need Clockwork Courser. And then the Baba Yaga deck. For the other setup that I do have to show you guys though, you'd be at 7.1k health with 102 damage, 62 res with 67 to myth and 65 to fire, perfect life and death accuracy for those Skeletal Pirates and Banshees that I mentioned. Your crit does go down, but your block goes up, so it's a pretty decent trade-off. You're still at the pierce cap. Your outgoing does take quite a hit, but you are more defensive, you have more health and resist to just tank out hits longer. And you still have solid pip chance. And the main changes that I made to setup was, instead of the Malastare hat, you're going to use the Croc hat. you're going to use the Burrower boots instead of the Chrysalis boots, which just give you a little bit more resist. You're going to use the Skyfarer Athame instead of the level 99 one, because this drop is retired, you can't actually get it anymore. And then you're going to use the Skyfarer ring with the same pet, same deck, all that. And then ideally you'd want a life culture as well, because otherwise you'd only be at 99 damage, you wouldn't be quite at the damage cap. Personally, I like the first setup better, but I think this setup should work okay if you don't have this Athame because you're unable to get it anymore. And as far as the deck setup goes, you definitely want some weakness counters, because you will be getting infectioned quite a bit as a life, threefolded as well, so you definitely want to be able to counter them. I personally like Glacial Fortress the best. Your new spell from the Burrower pack, also just one of your best spells in my opinion. Basically, I mean, it's a ton of damage for 4 pips, it's a protected over time, and I mean, it especially against balance, they can't shift it. And even if you're getting mana burn spammed like crazy, they can't really prevent this that easily. Goat Monk as well, very, very solid. It was even better when it was protected, but I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they are bringing protected heals back to life on their hidden heals like Caterpillar and Goat Monk. So this spell is going to be just an absolute menace when they do that. Luminous Weaver as well. Just combos very, very nice with the Goat Monk. You get the damage blade and the heal blade, and the Goat Monk just buffs both parts of it with that. And then as far as, you know, your regular heals go, I've never used Satyr or Dryad or anything like that anyways. I've always just carried 2 regenerates, and that's always worked perfectly fine for me. So I just keep the 2 regenerates in there, and it's perfectly fine. And something I added recently to the deck as well is Primal Oni, because I mean, you have, you know, Centaur's going to be giving you a lot of blades against a trap stacker, and you know, with you know, your side deck, you have some Star Blades in your side deck. You set up an Oni pretty easily. Before, I used to actually use the Jin instead, but it only, you know, you kind of had to wait for a Myth or a Fire matchup to Earthwalker, get the 2 OTs on very, very quickly, and then have time to get a couple of buffs up for the Jin. And Oni just does more damage anyways, so we swapped over to the Oni. And then for the side deck, we had, yeah, obviously shields and weaknesses, the Star Blades that I mentioned, Woodwalker. I just love Earthwalker, it's one of my favorite spells right now. Just 6 pips, 640 damage, pretty solid. If you just get the open hit and you have some, you know, you have some pips to burn, yeah, you just get some really solid damage out of this. Earthquake as well, because you don't want, you know, you don't really have anything to deal with shield stacking for a shield gambit, so Earthquake also very nice to have. 2 reshuffles, because sometimes it's gonna be a longer game, especially in like a mirror match or something. It is going to take quite a while to actually finish the game, so having 2 of them just kind of helps make sure you can keep going. And then as far as these last 2 spots that are open here, these are going to be Earthwalkers. I just need to trade the Azoth over to this character so I can craft them and throw them in, but I will be putting 2 Earthwalkers in this deck as well. But that's going to go ahead and be it for the life, so let's go ahead and move on. Alright, so next up we have the Myth. Now the Myth was actually very, very difficult to find a decent setup for, because I was trying to keep these setups as free to play as I possibly could. But with the Burrower pack currently in the game and in its current form, the gear at max is really good, and the boots at the very least are also very good for Exalted. So I'll show you guys the stats here in a second, but first we'll take a look at the stat caps for Myth. So 109 damage, 41 pierce, 5.7k health, and mid to high 60s on the resist is what you're capped at. So the stats that I've got right now, 5.5k health, we're good over the damage cap. So I could actually just completely get rid of the Gulcher mount that I'm on. I just don't have another mount to wear at the moment. 60 res across the board with 63 to ice and 64 to death. So the ice and death resist is, you know, a little bit closer to those caps. The rest of it is a decent bit off, but still very, very solid resist. 24 accuracy. This is, you got like a 1% chance to fizzle, like a gambit or a lore spell. It's not the end of the world. 450 crit, very solid. 266 block, kinda low, but it's still decent. It still works. It does its job. 41 pierce, so we're at the cap there, and perfect hit chance. So for the gear, got the Malistaire hat, got the Malistaire robe, got the Burrower boots. I was trying to use the Malistaire boots for a while, but I mean, you guys just look at the comparison. These boots are just better. 3 more res, more damage that you don't need, a little more health, pip chance. You give up some pip chance that you didn't need anyways. A little more block, and of course the school specific resist to ice and death. I've got the Chrysalis wand. You could use the Burrower wand if you wanted. Personally, I don't like it for a couple of reasons. One, I like to keep the myth wand hits, and 2, if you give up that 5 damage, then you do actually need the Gulcher mount, and you're already at the pierce cap anyway, so there's really no reason to do this. We've got the crafted Pierce of Fame from the Sardonyx, the recipe. You get the recipe from the same vendor that sells the resist ring recipes. We've got the Mire Amulet, the Morganth ring, double damage, double resist, armor breaker, and mighty on a Maple Moose. You could also use a Mystic Sabertooth for an extra bubble copy, but you don't necessarily need to win bubble to be successful on a myth. It helps, but you don't need to. Like I said, I'm just using this mount right now because it's just the mount that I was on, but you don't actually need the 3 damage from this mount. You can actually just not have a stat mount at all, which is actually pretty cool. Not too many setups that I've come up with in the past have really been able to do this, so it's actually kind of nice that you don't need a stat mount to run good myth stats. And of course the Baba Yaga deck that I like to use so much. This is the universal one because I still don't have the myth one. And then as for the deck setup, there's 2 ways you could play myth. You could either do the boring, bland, just not very fun trap stack strat, where you just have a bunch of myth traps, spirit traps, reliquary, some blades, and you just go for it. You just set up a Jhin, and at that point, with as many buffs as you're going to be putting on, you're just going to hit through a shield and one shot anyways. Or you could do what I think is a bit more fun and play more around myths overtimes. So we got the new Chrysalis spell, the Burrower pack spell. Very solid overtime, very comparable to the Oni actually. For 2 less pips, it's still, you get a ton of value out of this OT, so it's very solid. The Oni is also very good as the OT. You're not really going to be setting this up to actually do the 1200 damage base. And then I mentioned with the ice setup that there's another school that I like Jin's Reversal on, and that other school is the myth. It's a very good trap counter, and when you're playing around the OTs the way you are, or at least the way that I am, these overtime traps are actually very, very solid. It's just they just add an extra buff to whatever overtime it is that you're using. Keeper of the Flame is also very solid, and just some ninja paste, some celestials to have a couple solid hits, just in case you do have the open shot. And the side deck, a lot of spirit shields, a lot of Veli shields, trolls for the detonate, a couple basilisks, because sometimes if they do stun block, you just want it, rather than just having a big overtime that detonates, you actually want the value of the stun to give yourself an extra turn. and maybe just detonate this straight up, because the troll will actually work on the basilisk because it is just a normal damage over time. It's not one of the detonating over times that goes off after a couple turns. So troll, even though they haven't fixed it right now, does still add damage to the basilisk. But yeah, this gear and deck setup has been working pretty well for me. As of recording this part of the video, I just hit night earlier today, 21-7 currently, so it's doing very, very well for me. But yeah, that's gonna wrap it up for the myth. Let's move on. Alright, so next up we're gonna do the death school, and death right now is probably easily my best school, as far as at least as far as the overall record is concerned. Not necessarily the rank, but the record. So your stat caps for death: 113 damage, 37 pierce, and mid to high 60s, even into the 70s a little bit on the resist. So the stats that I'm currently running on the death: got 6k health, 110 damage, slightly under the cap, 63 universal res. It could be 64, but I just don't have the Shane amulet right now, so I am missing one resist right there. More than enough accuracy, 421 crit, 330 block, both very solid. 35 pierce, again slightly under the cap, but again, if I had the Shane amulet, that would be at 37 and would be at the cap there. And perfect pip chance. So the gear that we've got the Chrysalis hat, the Rattlebone robe, Rockstar kicks, Chrysalis wand, the Legacy of Fame, the 99 amulet right now as well, but again, I'm trying to get the Shane amulet. Skyfarer ring, double damage, double resist, armor breaker mighty on a mummy cat. There's a couple of different pet bodies you can use. The other main one that a lot of deaths use is the Death Dactyl, but personally I like the mummy cat a little bit better, since you don't really use the dark pact all like that from the Death Dactyl. It just does a lot of damage to yourself because of how the damage is calculated. And I mean, the Death Blade and the Death Scarab, they're nice to have, but they're not essential. And the 3 bond cards from the Mummy Cat are very, very nice to have. I got the Pierce Mount and the Baba Yaga deck, but there is actually a slightly better setup for this that actually gets you to the damage cap, and you'd still have 36 Pierce. And the main way you do that is you would drop Mighty on your pet and then run both Giver Talents, so you'd run a triple double breaker, and then you can honestly give up 1 damage from this and run the Darkmoor Fame instead, so you don't even need to run this, and that would put you at 113 damage. You'd still have 62 res, and you'd be at 36 pierce, so that is slightly better, but I just don't have that pet made, and I still don't have the Shane amulet, so we're making do with what we got. But I mean, right now I've only done 9 matches this season so far, but we are 8-1, so I mean, it's still, death is just still very solid school. As for the deck setup, we got some Glacial Fortresses, mostly for the mirror matchup, because not all deaths, but some of them love to 3-fold spam and then Vampire. So you do want to be able to counter that without having to hit through the -60s and get rid of them one by one. Obviously you want some Doom Onis because Shield Gambits are broken. Ghoul, very, very solid card for death, especially since you're going to be tri-shielding a lot. You just give up one of those shields for a couple 30 blades, break and debuff, have another buff. It's a lot of value out of this card. Monster Mash also pairs very well with the 3-fold spam. And Riding the Scales, just a very solid trap and shield counter at the same time. And then as for the side deck, definitely want poisons. You're gonna want your Wraiths. I have the Krakens in here as an OT counter, but you don't necessarily need to run those. And it might actually just be better to run Earthwalker because it is higher accuracy and you're going to fizzle it less. But there's not really any sort of utility you can get out of it. You don't use the OTs to set up anything as a death, so it's really up to you. I have a couple empowers in here as well, but same issue you have with Dark Pact you have with Empower. Because it is still a death spell, it uses your death damage to calculate the self damage. So you do a significantly higher amount of damage to yourself as a death with this, as opposed to any other school that's using it. So not really something I like to use all that often, but if I do need to use it, I will. Just a lot of tri-shields, a lot of spirit shields, a lot of elite shields, not really too many towers. Because really when you're against the balance, you're probably going to want a weakness more anyways. But yeah, that's the deck setup that I've been using. Got me to 8-1, and that I don't really count because it was to a trap stack ice, and I just wasn't pulling my trap counters. So I don't really count that as a real loss. But yeah, that's gonna be it for the death. Alright, so the final school that I can actually show you guys anything in the game, we have the fire. Now your stat caps as a fire, very similar to Myth, same damage cap, slightly higher pierce cap though with 43, slightly more health, but much lower resist, so that is kind of the trade-off that you're going to have between those two schools. So the stats that I'm currently running, got 5.4k health, slightly over damage cap, 53 res, perfect accuracy, 440 crit, 270 block. Both again fairly solid. The block's a little bit lower, but you're on a fire, so slightly under the pierce cap. But again, I don't have the Shane Amulet on this character, so that should be 43, and the resist should actually be 54. 54 outgoing and perfect pip chance. So the gear that we're running with this, the croc hat, Mally robe, Mally boots, Chrysalis wand, the 99 Athame. But once again, when they nerf outgoing and healing in general for PvP, I have been working on a slightly different setup to kind of play into that a little bit. So but for right now, healing fire is at least somewhat viable. Got the legacy of Thane right now as well, like I said, because I don't have the Shane Amulet. Got the Stone of the Other Side, and then a double Breaker Mighty Lord of Summer for the extra bubble, Pierce Mount, and the Baba Yaga deck. But when they do nerf outgoing and healing in general, the other setup that I have been working on, you'll be at 5.6k health with 109 damage. You'll be at the resist caps for every single school. 57 is the highest you can get, which you can only get that to Storm, but having it across the board just ensures you're at the caps for every other school. 29 accuracy, so again, just like the Myth, there's like a 1% chance that you fizzle a lore spell or a gambit, but it's not the end of the world. 450 crit, still very solid. 286 block, goes up a little bit, so it's even better. Slightly over the pierce cap now, but without the pierce mount, you're not gonna hit it, so. And then still perfect pips, and with this setup, you're still using Croc Hat, you're still using Mally robe, but you're gonna use the Burrower boots instead with the Burrower wand. And again, you could just stick with the Chrysalis wand and still be at the pierce cap and slightly over the damage cap, and that might actually just be better because you get the same school wand hits, so there's a little bit of an option there. We got the Pierce Athame, again the crafted one from the Sardonyx. We've got the Burrower's Amulet, or I'm sorry, it shouldn't be the Burrower, it should be the Great Inventor's Amulet, and we should actually have 5.7k health. My apologies there. But with this, you don't actually need any pierce from the Shane amulet. You'll still be at that 43 pierce cap, so at that point you can even run like a mastery amulet, but you don't need the resist at all, the extra resist from that. So I'm just going for the health, and you know, the item cards that you get from this amulet are pretty nice. And then we've got the Morgan ring, same pet and same mountain, the deck and all that. For the deck setup right now, this is the setup I've been using for the healing fire, but I'm sure it'll also work fairly well with these non-healing stats. You definitely want some sort of weakness counter. I like Glacial Fortress the best for the death matchups, for the same reasons I explained when going over the death deck. Firecat is a nice little detonate to have. Definitely gonna want some Djinns, because you are probably going to be playing around that a good bit, especially with things like Nat the Scarab and Djinn's Reversal setting up those traps. Elephant's also just a very solid spell to have. As a shield counter, you can just hit straight through shields and it just does not matter. They put up another shield, you just get a ton of value for this. King Art for the stun, and I'm still gonna have this spell in here even though I don't really have any healing to go with it anymore. But you know, we'll see how it works without any healing. And then as for the side deck, a lot of tower shields, a lot of weaknesses, links, cheap little overtime. The heal isn't really that good, but you're not really doing it too much for the heal unless you're trying to set up the Oni. Earthwalkers as an OG counter, just because the accuracy is pretty high. You don't like I said, you don't actually get any sort of utility out of this, besides the fact that you get, besides the overtime. But the overtime's not doing damage, you're not using it to set anything up. Ember Everburns, nice little 6-pip hit. Immolate is a very, very strong finisher, 4 pips. Ifrit also just almost, I would even say, essential for a fire to have at least a couple of them in their deck. And then obviously some more empowers and things like that. With the healing stats at least, I did actually manage to get back to Knight this season with that deck setup, or 10 and 5, so not the greatest record, but we are at least 1700. We did hit Knight once again, so to an extent, at the very least, it does work a little bit, although I'm not entirely sure how much higher you could take the healing fire setup. The Djinn trap setup is just much stronger, and even if you don't get the condition met with the 4 traps, if you just have like Djinn reversal traps or something and you send this as an overtime, it's still doing a ton of damage. But yeah, that's gonna wrap it up for the fire, and then go ahead and give you guys a couple words on the 2 schools that I do not currently have. And for the final 2 schools, Storm and Balance, even though I don't have them leveled up right now, I will at least try to give you guys a little bit of a direction to go with them as far as the gear and whatnot. First I'll go ahead and show you guys the stats of a Balance. Hopefully he doesn't mind that I'm showing these off right now. But he's using the Malister hat, the Rattlebones robe, Burrower boots. His pet has Dealer, Double Resist, Breaker, and Mighty, and then he just kind of sockets whatever it is that he wants to socket on there. Chrysalis Wand, Darkmoor Theme, Shane Amulet, Aphrodite Ring, and he's got the Darkmoor deck. You can also use the Baba Yaga deck. And as far as his stats go, he's actually he's actually got a lot of the caps hit. So as for the stat caps of Balance, we're at 107 damage with 38 pierce, and similar to Death, you know, mid to high 60s on the resist. So he's at damage cap, 61 res, which is still pretty solid, 22 accuracy, so he has like a 3% chance to fizzle Supernova if someone decides to aura against him. Decent crit. The block universally is pretty low, but between the Aphrodite Ring and the Burrower boots he's got, you know, he gets some extra block to 4 different schools, which isn't too bad. But personally, I would like to have, you know, the block universally a little bit higher. And, you know, Pierce Cap with the perfect pips. This might be a little bit hard to follow, so just bear with me. It's not exactly the prettiest thing to look at, but just some, you know, a kind of an early look at like the setup that I'm personally planning on running on the Storm, which your caps are 123 damage with 38 pierce, which honestly, thank God, because Storm used to just run 51 or 53 pierce or whatever it was that they were running, and it was just way too much. So I'm glad that they're just capped at 38, honestly. And, you know, high 40s to low 50s on the resist. So, you know, as far as the setup I'm currently looking at running, we're at the damage cap. Basically the resist cap for every school. Solid crit. Block's a little bit low, but like honestly might help with your crit heals on yourself. Perfect accuracy for everything. Perfect pick chance, and 39 pierce is slightly over the cap, but not a big deal. And Storm is actually also capped at 67 outgoing, but this is looking at 69. But again, you know, this will get nerfed at some point anyways. And the gear setup that that accomplishes these stats, you got the Malistaire hat, the Malistaire robe, Chrysalis boots, Chrysalis wand, the Legacy of Fame once again, but you know, once, like I said, this will probably not even be that meta once the outgoing cap gets lowered. Stone of the Other Side once again, Shane Amulet, and probably the weirdest pet out of any of them. I'm looking at a Dealer, Double Resist, Medic, and Pip of Plenty pet with Mighty. Because you don't even need Breaker with this setup to hit the Pierce cap. So you can actually just swap off Breaker for Pips to be a perfect, to have your Pip chance go all the way up. And then you don't even need the Pierce mount either. You can, so I would run the Gulcher mount with that. But yeah, that's just kind of what that's just kind of the plan for what I'm gonna run once I get the Storm leveled up eventually. But yeah, that's gonna go ahead and be it for this video. Hopefully, if you're getting into if you're just trying to get into PvP, or you're a little confused with how you're supposed to, you know, hit these stat caps without going overboard, hopefully this at least gives you a helpful starting point to then build off of for yourself. And hopefully you just enjoyed the video in general. We'll be back to the PvP content in a little bit, but yeah, hopefully you found this helpful. Hopefully you enjoyed. A like would be awesome if you did, and I will see you guys in the next one.